For years, I carried this story inside me like a stone in my chest. I did not tell it because I was ashamed. Then I did not tell it because I was afraid people would not believe me. Later, when everything had already changed, I kept silent because some memories are too alive to touch with careless words. But there comes a time when silence stops protecting you and starts keeping the wrong people safe. So I will tell it now. The last time my grandmother smiled at me was 3 days before she died. She was lying in a narrow hospital bed in Portland, Oregon, thinner than I had ever seen her, her hands resting on the blanket like pale branches. The machines beside her breathed and whispered. Rain tapped against the window. The room smelled of disinfectant, weak coffee, and the lavender lotion I had rubbed into her wrists every evening. My grandmother, Eleanor Whitaker, had been a school teacher for almost 40 years. Even at 83, with cancer taking the last of her strength, she still had the same warm, slightly mischievous eyes she had used on generations of children when they thought they had gotten away with something. I was fixing her blanket when she caught my wrist. Her grip was so sudden and so strong that I froze. "Claire," she whispered. "I'm here, Grandma." She looked past me for a moment, as if she could see something beyond the ceiling tiles, beyond the hospital, beyond the wet city streets. Then she said, "Tell him not to regret anything. The house by the river will set it right." I leaned closer, thinking I had misheard her. "What house?" But her fingers loosened. Her eyes drifted shut. A nurse came in a few minutes later to check her medication, and I told myself it was the fever, the morphine, the confused dreaming of a dying mind. What house by the river? Grandma had not been back to Millstone Creek in 12 years. She had grown up there, in a small town tucked into the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, but after Grandpa died, she moved to Portland to be closer to us. Her life, at least the life I knew, had become very ordinary. A one-bedroom apartment with geraniums on the windowsill, stacks of old student drawings she could never throw away, a worn green armchair, a kettle that whistled too loudly, crossword puzzles, church suppers, birthday cards with $5 bills tucked inside. That was the grandmother I knew. I had no idea she had been keeping a secret large enough to change my whole life. The funeral was on May 15th. It was one of those cold spring days when the sky seems lower than usual, pressing on your shoulders. A fine gray rain fell during the service. There were not many people at the cemetery, a handful of former teachers, 2 old neighbors from her apartment building, a few grown students who still called her Mrs. Whitaker, my older brother Sam and his wife Rachel, my husband Mark beside me holding an umbrella that mostly covered himself. Afterward, we went back to Grandma's apartment. I moved through the rooms as if I were underwater, pouring coffee, setting out sandwiches, accepting condolences I could barely hear. People spoke softly around me. Someone cried in the kitchen. Someone else said Grandma had always made the best apple cake. And at some point, I caught Mark looking at the walls, not grieving, not remembering, measuring. His eyes moved from the windows to the kitchen cabinets, from the little balcony to the old hardwood floors, as if he were already calculating what the apartment might be worth and how quickly it could be sold. I knew that look. I had seen it before. I just had never allowed myself to name it. At 7 that evening, after the last guest had left, the attorney arrived. His name was Victor Henderson. He was a precise man in a charcoal suit, with silver glasses and a leather folder that looked older than I was. He did not waste words. He offered condolences, sat at Grandma's small dining table, and opened the folder as if he were opening a file in court. Only the closest family stayed. Sam sat with Rachel near the window. Mark sat beside me, silent but tense. I remember the sound of rain against the balcony railing. I remember the smell of cold coffee. I remember thinking I wanted everyone to leave so I could sit in Grandma's chair and finally cry. Mr. Henderson began reading. To my brother Sam, Grandma left her apartment in Portland. It was small, but the neighborhood had changed over the years, and the value was much higher than anyone expected. Rachel straightened in her chair the moment the amount was mentioned. Sam looked stunned, and then ashamed of looking stunned. Then Mr. Henderson turned a page. "To my granddaughter, Claire Ann Whitaker," he read, "I leave the residence and adjoining land located at 417 River Bend Road, Millstone Creek, North Carolina, together with the funds held in my private savings account in the amount of $382,000. The room went so quiet I could hear the old refrigerator click on in the kitchen. Mark stopped breathing beside me. I felt it more than heard it, the sudden stillness in him, like the air changes before a storm. Mr. Henderson continued, "There is one condition. Neither the residence, the land, nor the funds may be sold, transferred, pledged, gifted, or otherwise disposed of for a period of 2 years from the date of inheritance. Any violation of this condition will result in the entire inheritance being transferred to the Millstone Creek Children's Home." Rachel blinked. Sam whispered, "She still owned that place?" I could not speak. My grandmother, who had clipped coupons and reused tea bags, had left me a house in another state and nearly $400,000. A house I had never seen. Money no one knew existed. A condition so strange it sounded less like a legal instruction and more like a warning. Mark leaned forward. "Can it be rented?" he asked. The attorney glanced at him. A lease would not violate the terms, provided ownership remains unchanged. Mark sat back slowly. I could almost see the numbers arranging themselves behind his eyes. Then Mr. Henderson took a sealed envelope from the folder and handed it to me. My name was written across the front in Grandma's careful schoolteacher handwriting. Under it were 5 words: "Open when you are alone." The drive home took 40 minutes. Mark did not speak for the first 20. He drove with both hands on the wheel, jaw tight, rain sweeping across the windshield in silver sheets. I held the envelope in my lap and stared at my grandmother's handwriting. At last he said, "You knew about this?" "No. Don't lie to me, Claire." I turned my head. "I didn't know." He gave a short laugh with no humor in it. "So your grandmother just secretly had a house and almost 400 grand sitting around, and you had no idea?" Apparently, he repeated, and the word sounded like an accusation. That was Mark. He did not shout often. He did not need to. He had a way of making ordinary words feel like a hand closing around your throat. We had been married 9 years. For most of those years, I told myself he was ambitious. Then I told myself he was stressed. Then I told myself marriage was difficult for everyone, and I should not expect tenderness every day. By the time I understood that I had been making excuses for cruelty, I was already so used to being tired that tired felt like a personality. I worked nights as a registered nurse at a county hospital. Mark ran a small import business that never quite succeeded, but always required money, patience, and my silence. He liked people to think he was charming. He liked expensive shoes, loud watches, and conversations in which he could mention plans that sounded larger than his actual life. What he did not like was being told no. At home, he followed me into the kitchen before I had even taken off my coat. "We're not waiting 2 years," he said. I set the envelope on the table. "Grandma made that condition for a reason. Your grandmother was dying. People get sentimental when they're dying. It was in the will. There are lawyers who handle things like this." I looked at him then, really looked. His eyes were bright, almost feverish, not with grief, not even with surprise, with hunger. "Handle what?" "The restriction, the property, the money. Claire, don't be naive. That house is probably falling apart. Some old mountain shack she forgot about. We sell it, or we borrow against it, or we find someone who knows how to structure it." "We?" The word came out quietly. He stared at me. "Excuse me?" She left it to me. For a second, his face went blank. Then something hard moved across it. "Don't start that." "I'm not starting anything." You think because your dead grandmother left you money, you're suddenly independent?" I did not answer. He stepped closer. "You have no idea how the world works. You'd lose everything in 6 months without me." I looked down at the envelope. "Open when you are alone." It was as if Grandma had known, as if she had seen the shape of my life more clearly than I had. "I want to read her letter," I said. "Then read it. Alone." He smiled then, but it was not a smile. No. Something inside me went very still. I picked up the envelope. Mark reached for it. I pulled back. The movement was small, almost nothing. But in our marriage, it was the first stone falling from a wall. His hand closed around my wrist. "Give it to me. Let go. Claire, let go of me." He did, but only after squeezing hard enough to leave the shape of his fingers on my skin. I walked into the bedroom, locked the door, and opened the letter with trembling hands. "My dearest Claire, if you are reading this, then I have gone ahead, and I am sorry for leaving you with questions instead of answers. I did that because some truths have to be found in the right place, not explained in the wrong one. Go to the house. Do not sell it. Do not let Mark touch it. Do not let anyone rush you. The money is enough for you to breathe, but the house is the reason I left it to you. There are people in Millstone Creek who will help you, and there are people who will try to frighten you. Trust your own eyes. Trust the river. And if you meet Daniel Harper, tell him I never blamed him. The house will set it right. Love, Grandma." I read the letter 3 times. Daniel Harper. I had never heard the name. By the time I opened the bedroom door, Mark was waiting in the hallway. "Well?" he said. I folded the letter and put it in my pocket. "I'm going to North Carolina." He stared at me as if I had spoken another language. "No, you're not." "Yes, I am." "For what? To play pioneer in some rotten house?" "To see what she left me." "I'll go with you." "No." The word surprised us both. He took 1 step toward me. "Say that again." "No." I expected shouting. I expected insults. What came instead was worse. He went calm. "Then don't come back here." I stood in the hallway of our rented apartment with my grandmother's letter in my pocket and my husband's eyes on me, and I understood that he meant it, not as a dramatic threat, not as something he would apologize for later. He meant it because he believed I would break. So I packed 1 suitcase. He watched from the doorway while I put in jeans, sweaters, work shoes, my nurse's license papers, Grandma's letter, and the old photograph of her and Grandpa that had sat on my dresser for years. "You'll call me by tomorrow," he said. I zipped the suitcase. "Maybe." His face changed then, just a little. For the first time that night, he looked uncertain. I left before he could turn uncertainty into cruelty. 2 days later, after a red-eye flight to Charlotte and a 3-hour drive through rain and low clouds, I reached Millstone Creek. The town appeared slowly, like something remembered. A main street with brick storefronts, a white church steeple, a diner with a faded blue sign, mountains rising dark behind everything. The river ran along the edge of town, wide and cold, turning silver under the morning sky. Riverbend Road curved away from the center, narrowing as it followed the water. The house stood at the end of it. For a moment, I simply sat in the rental car with the engine running. It was not a shack. It was old, yes, weathered, tired, but it had dignity. A 2-story white farmhouse with a deep front porch, green shutters, and a stone chimney. Wild grass had taken over the yard. Apple trees leaned in the side garden. Beyond the back fence, the land sloped down toward the river, where water moved over rocks with a steady, living sound. I turned off the engine. The silence was so complete it made my ears ring. Then a woman called from the road. "You must be Eleanor's girl." I turned. She was small, round, and wrapped in a blue cardigan, with white hair tucked under a knitted hat and eyes that missed nothing. She carried a covered dish in both hands. "I'm Claire," I said. "I know. You have her mouth." She came through the gate without waiting to be invited. I'm Nadine Baker. Everybody calls me Mrs. Nadine, which is ridiculous because I'm not a school principal, but try telling them that." I laughed before I could stop myself. It was the first laugh I had managed since Grandma died. Mrs. Nadine pressed the dish into my hands. "Chicken and dumplings. You'll need food before this house starts talking." "Before it what?" "Talking." She nodded toward the porch. "Old houses do. Especially when people come back after being gone too long." Inside, the house smelled of dust, cedar, cold ashes, and lavender. Someone had kept it cleaner than I expected. Sheets covered the furniture. The kitchen was old but orderly. A cast-iron skillet hung by the stove. Jars lined the pantry shelves. On the dining room wall, I found a photograph of my grandmother as a young woman, standing on the porch with dark hair loose around her shoulders, smiling at someone outside the frame. She looked nothing like the quiet widow I had known. She looked wild with happiness. Mrs. Nadine watched me looking. "Your grandmother loved this place," she said. "Then why did she leave?" The older woman pressed her lips together. "Some stories don't fit through another person's mouth. You'll find what you need." Before leaving, she handed me another envelope. My name was written on it in Grandma's handwriting. "She gave me this years ago," Mrs. Nadine said. "Told me I'd know when." "When what?" "When you came." I waited until she was gone before opening it. "Claire, if Nadine has given you this, then you made it to the porch. Good. Stay one night before deciding anything. Listen to the river. Look behind the loose brick in the kitchen hearth. And remember, fear is not always a warning. Sometimes it is just an old habit trying to keep its job. Grandma." I found the loose brick after sunset. Behind it was a small metal box. Inside were photographs, old letters tied with string, property papers, a yellowed newspaper clipping, and a man's pocket watch wrapped in cloth. The letters were addressed to Eleanor from someone named Thomas. My grandfather's name had been Henry. My hands went cold. I did not read them that night. I carried the box to the kitchen table, made tea I did not drink, and sat while darkness filled the windows. That was when I saw the light. At first, I thought it was a reflection. Then it moved between the trees behind the broken back fence. A flashlight. Slow. Deliberate. Not random. Whoever carried it knew the land. I stood so quickly the chair scraped the floor. The light stopped at the fence. For a few seconds it pointed toward the house. Then it turned away and disappeared into the woods. I locked every door. The next morning, I found the broken boards stacked neatly beside the fence. A man was kneeling in the grass, measuring the gap. He looked up when I stepped onto the porch. He was in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair threaded with gray at the temples and a short beard that made him look more tired than rough. He wore a brown canvas jacket, work boots, and gloves. There was sawdust on one sleeve. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said. His voice was low, calm. "Who are you?" "Daniel Harper." The name moved through me like a match striking. Grandma's letter. If you meet Daniel Harper, tell him I never blamed him. I gripped the porch railing. "Why are you on my property?" He stood slowly, as if he did not want to frighten me. "Nadine said the back fence was down. I figured I'd patch it before weather came in." "You were here last night." His face did not change much, but his eyes sharpened. "I walked the tree line after I saw a truck slow down by the road. Wasn't sure who was in it." "You could have knocked." "I could have." "Why didn't you?" He looked toward the river. "Because women who arrive alone in old houses don't usually appreciate strange men knocking after dark." That answer was so reasonable that I did not know what to do with it. "Did you know my grandmother?" "Yes." "How?" He took off one glove and rubbed his thumb over the scar across his palm. "She saved my life once," he said. Then he picked up his tools. "I'll fix the fence and leave." He did exactly that. He did not ask to come inside. He did not ask questions. He repaired the boards, tested each one with his hand, gathered his tools, and walked down the drive. "Mrs. Nadine appeared an hour later with biscuits and a face that told me she knew everything. Daniel was here, I said. I saw his truck. Grandma mentioned him. Mrs. Nadine's expression softened. Then she meant for you to ask. Ask what? Why a good man can spend 8 years believing he ruined the only good thing that ever happened to him. That afternoon, I read the letters from the metal box. They were not love letters from Thomas to my grandmother. They were letters from my grandmother to a man named Thomas Whitaker, her older brother, written during a time when their family almost lost the house. Their father had been injured at the mill. Bills piled up. A resort company wanted to buy the river lots. My great-grandmother refused to sell. Thomas left town after an argument and never came back. The newspaper clipping was about a flood that had destroyed part of Millstone Creek 31 years earlier. 3 people had died. One name was circled in pencil, Catherine Harper, Daniel's wife. I found him 2 days later at a small workshop behind the old hardware store. The door was open. He was planing a piece of wood, the movement steady and precise. Sunlight fell through the dusty windows in pale strips. "Catherine was your wife," I said. His hand stopped. He did not turn around for a moment. "Yes." "My grandmother wrote that she never blamed you." He set the tool down. The silence after that was so long I thought he might tell me to leave. Instead, he said, "I was driving the rescue boat that night." He told it without drama, which somehow made it worse. The river had flooded after 3 days of rain. A section of road gave way. Catherine, who was 7 months pregnant, had been trapped with 2 others near the old bridge. Daniel had been part of the volunteer rescue team. He reached them. He got 1 man out. Then the current shifted. The boat hit debris. Catherine slipped. He went in after her. He almost drowned too. My grandmother, who had been helping at the church shelter, was the one who kept him alive until the ambulance came. "People said I should have saved her first," he said. "Did Grandma say that?" He looked at me then. "No, she said grief looks for someone to blame because it can't stand having nowhere to go." I felt my throat tighten. "She wrote that she never blamed you." His eyes lowered. For a moment, the man in front of me seemed younger and much older at the same time. "I needed to hear that 8 years ago," he said. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You brought it when you could." That was the beginning. Not of love. Not yet. The beginning of something quieter. Daniel started stopping by when something needed fixing. A leaking pipe, a sticking back door, a porch step that sagged under my foot. He never stayed too long. He never pushed. Sometimes we drank coffee on the porch and spoke about the weather, the river, the way old wood swells before rain. In those first days, I learned the house by inches. I learned that the front parlor looked formal until afternoon light touched the old piano and made the whole room gentle. I learned that the pantry door only closed if you lifted the handle first. I learned that the upstairs hallway smelled strongest of cedar after rain. I learned that my grandmother had hidden small things everywhere, not valuables exactly, but messages from a life she had never fully described. In a sewing basket, I found a thimble wrapped in tissue and a note that said, "Your great-grandmother mended shirts for half the men in this county and never once mended a lie." In a cracked blue vase, I found a photograph of Grandma at 17, standing beside a boy with black hair and a serious face. On the back, she had written, "Thomas before he left, summer of 1959. Thomas was her brother, the one no one in Portland ever mentioned. Mrs. Nadine told me pieces while shelling peas at my kitchen table, as if she had moved in by committee vote. Tommy Whitaker thought leaving meant winning," she said. "Some people do. They confuse distance with freedom." "Did he ever come back?" "Once, for your great-grandmother's funeral. He stood in that yard for 10 minutes, never came inside, then drove away." "Why?" "Pride. Shame. Same coat, different buttons." The house, I began to understand, had not simply been property to my grandmother. It was the place where every fracture in her family had left a mark. A brother gone, a father injured, A mother holding ground against men who smelled opportunity in someone else's hardship. A young teacher who married Henry, moved away, and still kept paying taxes on a house everyone assumed she had forgotten. At night, I sat at the dining room table and read through old papers. Not all of them made sense. Deeds, boundary maps, water rights, old receipts for lumber and stove repair, letters from county offices written in language meant to exhaust ordinary people. One folder was labeled River Easement. I did not know then how important that folder would become. It contained a 1974 agreement granting the house permanent access to the River Road, signed by 3 neighboring landowners and filed with the county. On the back, Grandma had written, "They will pretend this does not exist if it becomes useful to them." I copied that sentence into a notebook. I did not know why. I only knew my grandmother had underlined the word useful twice. I told him I was a nurse. He told me Millstone Creek had not had a full-time clinic in almost 20 years. "People drive 40 minutes for stitches," he said. "Longer if it's snowing." "That's dangerous." "It is." He said it like a man who had learned to live with things that should have been unacceptable. One afternoon, Mrs. Nadine took me to the old grocery, which was really half grocery, half post office, half local courtroom, though mathematics had never stopped anyone in Millstone Creek. People looked at me as if I were both familiar and brand new. "Eleanor's granddaughter," Mrs. Nadine announced before anyone could ask. That changed the room. An older man in a feed cap told me Grandma had taught him to read after school because his father thought school was for soft boys. A woman with silver braids said Grandma once stood between her and a bank officer who had come to threaten foreclosure. The cashier, who could not have been more than 25, said her mother still kept a Christmas ornament Grandma had made with her second-grade class. I listened, embarrassed and proud and sad in a way I did not have a name for. In Portland, Grandma had seemed small. In Millstone Creek, she was everywhere. That night, I called Mark back for the first time. I do not know why. Maybe some part of me wanted to share what I had found. Maybe I still believed he could become the man I had once imagined. "People here loved her," I said. "Great," he replied. "Can those people pay property tax?" The disappointment was so sharp it almost felt clarifying. "That's what you want to talk about?" "That's what adults talk about." "I found old documents. There may be a development issue with the land." He went quiet for half a breath. "What kind of development?" "I don't know yet." "You should send me copies." "Why?" "Because you don't understand that kind of thing." There it was again, the old rhythm. He reduced me first, then offered himself as the solution. "I'll handle it," I said. "You handling things is how we got here." I ended the call with my thumb hovering over the screen, surprised by how little guilt followed. Mark called every day for the first week. I did not answer. Then he texted, "You are embarrassing yourself." Then, "We need to discuss the money like adults." Then, "I know you think this is freedom. It is not. It is a vacation from reality." Finally, "Call me before I make this legal." I showed Mrs. Nadine. She read the messages at my kitchen table, put the phone down, and said, "I have known garden snakes with warmer personalities." I laughed so hard I cried. The next day, a black SUV came up River Bend Road. It stopped at my gate, smooth and quiet, too expensive for that rutted road. A man got out wearing a wool coat, polished shoes, and a smile that looked practiced in mirrors. "Mrs. Claire Whitaker?" he said. "Claire Martin," I corrected automatically, using Mark's last name. "Of course. My apologies. Claire." He offered a card. "Elliot Vance. Blue Ridge Horizon Development." The name meant nothing to me then. He looked at the house the way Mark had looked at Grandma's apartment, not seeing a place, seeing numbers. "Your grandmother and I corresponded briefly years ago," he said. "We had interest in several properties along this stretch of river. Beautiful land. Underused, sadly." "Underused?" "I mean no offense, but Millstone Creek has enormous potential. Responsible development could bring jobs, tourism, tax revenue, a boutique resort, walking trails, cabins, a small lift to the overlook perhaps. This is my home. For now. The words were soft, almost polite. I felt my shoulders tighten. He smiled again. I understand the property has a temporary restriction. We are patient people, but restrictions can be worked around when all parties benefit. I'm not selling. You have been here less than a week. I'm still not selling. His smile did not change, but the air around him cooled. Offers have a way of changing with circumstances. Behind me, I heard a truck door close. Daniel had pulled up without my noticing. Elliot Vance looked past me and saw him. For one brief second, the mask slipped. Recognition, anger, calculation. Then the smile returned. Daniel Harper, he said. Still repairing fences? Still watching yours get crossed, Daniel replied. Neither man moved. I looked from one to the other. You know each other? Vance put his card back into his coat pocket. Everyone knows everyone in small towns. He gave me a small bow that made me want to step back. My offer stands for 1 week. After that, circumstances may change. When the SUV disappeared around the bend, I turned to Daniel. Tell me. He did. A year earlier, Blue Ridge Horizon had hired him as a local consultant. They wanted him to evaluate old roads, water access, soil, bridges. The money had been good, and he had taken the contract before seeing the full plan. The resort project cut straight across several river lots, including Grandma's. Houses would be demolished. Families would be pressured to leave. Paperwork had been arranged to make resistance difficult. Arranged how? Forged signatures, false easements, county officials willing to look the other way. You knew this? I learned it. Then I walked away and filed a complaint. What happened? It opened, then closed. Quietly. Why didn't you tell me? He looked at me for a long moment. Because you had just arrived. Because you were alone. Because I thought if I told you the whole truth, you would pack your suitcase and go back to Portland. That should have been my choice. Yes, he said, it should have. The apology was in the way he said it, but it was not enough. Still, he had told me the truth when I asked. That mattered. Mark arrived that evening. I heard the car before I saw it. A rented sedan came fast around the bend and stopped crookedly by the gate. Mark got out in the same dark coat he had worn at the funeral. He looked tired, angry, and determined to make his anger useful. Nice, he said, looking at the house. So this is what was worth throwing away your marriage. You told me not to come back. I was upset. You were clear. He walked through the gate without permission. Daniel, who had been stacking wood near the shed, stepped into view. Mark stopped. His eyes moved over Daniel's work jacket, boots, and hands. Then he looked at me. That was fast. Heat rose to my face. Don't. Don't what? Notice you found a mountain handyman to comfort you? Daniel's face went still. You should leave, he said. Mark laughed. And you are? The neighbor. How convenient. I stepped between them. Mark, go home. Home? He leaned closer. Our home is in Portland. This is a legal matter, Claire. You are my wife. Any major asset acquired during marriage can affect both of us. Inherited property is separate property. I had looked it up. The surprise on his face was small but satisfying. Then he recovered. You have no idea what you're doing. Maybe not, but I know what I'm not doing. And what is that? Letting you scare me. For the first time in 9 years, I watched Mark run out of words. Not because he had none, because the ones he usually used no longer landed. He left with a threat about attorneys and mental fitness and fraudulent influence. I stood on the porch until his taillights vanished. Daniel did not say anything. He only placed a mug of hot tea on the railing beside me and walked back to the woodpile. That was the moment I began to trust him. Not when he defended me, not when he told me about Vance, but when he knew not to turn my pain into a conversation he wanted to control. 2 weeks passed. I learned the sound of the house in the morning, pipes ticking, floorboards answering my steps, the river below the hill, wind in the apple trees, Mrs. Nadine knocking with no rhythm whatsoever, always bringing something, soup, gossip, a pie, a warning. I learned that Millstone Creek remembered my grandmother differently than I did. To me, she had been soft cardigans and bedtime stories. To them, she had been the woman who taught 3 generations to read, who argued with county men twice her size, who opened her house during storms, who kept money hidden not because she was greedy, but because she did not trust men in suits who said they knew what was best for everyone. I found more notes, one in a recipe box. If you are angry, make bread. If you are sad, clean a window. If you are afraid, go outside and look at what is still standing, one tucked behind a framed photograph. The first lie sounds like concern, one in an old nursing textbook she had kept from a friend. You were made to heal, Claire. Do not spend your life bandaging a man who keeps cutting you so you stay busy. That one made me sit on the floor and cry until the light changed in the room. Daniel found me there. He did not come close at first. "Should I get Nadine?" he asked. I shook my head. He sat against the opposite wall, leaving space between us, and waited. After a while, I said, "I think she knew my marriage was bad." Eleanor saw more than people wanted her to. Why didn't she say something? Would you have listened? I wiped my face with my sleeve. No. He nodded, not unkindly. Sometimes love has to leave a door open and pray you find it. It should have sounded sentimental. From him, it sounded like something he had learned the hard way. The trouble began after I refused Vance's second offer. First, a county inspector appeared and claimed there were complaints about the porch and wiring. Then someone left an unsigned note in my mailbox. Old houses burn fast. Then Mark called again. This time, I answered. "What did you do?" I asked. That's a dramatic greeting. "Did you tell Blue Ridge Horizon about the will?" He was silent too long. I made inquiries. "You spoke to Vance." "I spoke to people who understand business." "You gave them information about my inheritance." "Our future," he snapped. "I am trying to salvage our future." "No. You're trying to get access to money." His voice dropped. "Be careful, Claire. People in small towns love stories. A fragile woman, grieving, isolated, influenced by a local man with a grudge. That story writes itself." I hung up with my hands shaking. That night, someone set fire to the tool shed. The flames were small when I saw them, orange behind the rain-dark glass. I ran outside barefoot, screaming. Daniel came from the tree line with a fire extinguisher before I had reached the yard. Mrs. Nadine called 911. The fire department came fast, but the shed door was blackened and half the roof was gone. In the ash, near the back wall, Daniel found a burned piece of paper. Only one corner had survived. It looked like part of a site plan. There was a signature at the bottom. Daniel Harper. I saw his face when he looked at it. He went pale. Not guilty, not angry, pale. But for 3 seconds, he did not speak. And in those 3 seconds, every old lesson Mark had taught me came back. Do not trust silence. Do not trust kindness. Do not trust a man who arrives exactly when you need him. I took the paper from him. "Claire," he said, "I need to think." I went inside and closed the door. Not slammed it. Closed it. Somehow that was worse. All night I sat at the kitchen table with the charred paper under the glass cutting board. I knew what I had seen. I also knew what my fear wanted me to believe. Fear has a voice. It sounds like reason when you are tired enough. The next morning, Daniel was gone. His truck was not in his driveway. The workshop was locked. Mrs. Nadine came over with coffee, saw my face, and lowered herself into the chair across from me. "Before you decide anything," she said, "you need to know why he hates that company." "I know about the contract." "Not all of it." She brought an old newspaper from under her coat and placed it on the table. The article was from 8 years earlier. It was about the flood, about Catherine Harper, about the failed rescue, about accusations from angry relatives. But tucked near the end was one paragraph I had not seen in Grandma's clipping. The county had delayed repairs on the old bridge for 2 years after a private developer objected to access restrictions that would affect future land use. The developer's name was not Blue Ridge Horizon then. It was one of Elliott Vance's earlier companies. Daniel went after them after Catherine died, Mrs. Nadine said. He couldn't prove they caused the flood. Nobody could. But he proved they knew the bridge was dangerous. They buried it. Your grandmother helped him gather records. Grandma? She kept everything. Letters, meeting notes, dates, copies. Eleanor didn't trust charming men with clean shoes. I looked toward the burned shed. Where is Daniel? County seat, I imagine. He said if words would not work, paper might. I drove there with a man named Mike who owned the tow truck and knew every road in 3 counties. He did not ask questions. He only put a travel mug of coffee in the cup holder and said, "Nadine told me to bring you alive and not let you marry anybody stupid." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to me all week. We found Daniel at a notary office in Asheville. The building had green shutters and a heavy wooden door. Inside, the hallway smelled of polished floors, paper, and old heating vents. I heard his voice before I saw him. "I swear this signature is not mine," he was saying. "I am attaching the original termination letter from my contract. I am willing to testify in any civil or criminal proceeding." I stopped outside the half-open door. Daniel sat across from an elderly notary, signing document after document. There was a thick folder on the desk, copies of letters, county records, his old complaint, the forged plan, photographs of the shed, a statement about Vance. He was not asking me to believe him. He was building the proof so I would not have to believe blindly. Something inside me gave way, not loudly, not dramatically. It simply loosened. When he stepped into the hallway 20 minutes later and saw me, he stopped as if the floor had moved. "Claire." "I found the article," I said, "about the bridge." He looked down. "Nadine talks too much." "She talks exactly enough." The corner of his mouth moved, but he did not quite smile. "I should have told you." "Yes." "I was afraid you would leave." "I almost did." He nodded once. "I know." I took a breath. "I'm sorry I closed the door." He looked at me then, and the exhaustion in his face was so bare it hurt. "You had reason." "Not enough. Enough for someone who has been taught that trust costs too much." I wanted to cry again, but I was tired of crying in public buildings. Instead, I said, "What do we do now?" He lifted the folder. "Now we make it hard for them to lie." It took 3 months. 3 months of lawyers, statements, county meetings, inspections, and threats, dressed up as courtesy. Mark filed a claim suggesting he had an interest in the inherited funds. It went nowhere, but not before he used it to frighten me. He sent emails full of concern about my emotional state. He hinted that Daniel was manipulating me. He wrote to my brother. He also sent a letter through an attorney claiming I had abandoned the marriage and was making irrational financial decisions while grieving. The language was polished, but I heard Mark in every sentence. He had always been good at turning control into concern. My divorce attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Wells, read the letter once and placed it neatly on her desk. "Men like this believe the court is another room where they can raise their voice," she said. "We will disappoint him." I liked her immediately. Patricia made me document everything: old messages, bank transfers, the way Mark had used my income to cover his failed business debts, the night he told me not to come home, the bruise on my wrist that I had photographed without knowing why. "You do not need to prove he is a monster," she said. "You need to prove the facts. Facts age better than emotion." So I learned to write things down: dates, times, names, what was said, what was threatened, what was signed. It felt strange at first, turning pain into paragraphs. Then it began to feel like reclaiming the record of my own life. While Patricia handled Mark, Daniel and I worked with a local attorney named Grace Ellison, who had grown up in Millstone Creek and had the calm smile of a woman who enjoyed watching arrogant people underestimate her. Grace spread Grandma's files across my dining room table one Saturday morning. Old maps, easements, tax records, letters, photographs, copies of county minutes. "Your grandmother was better organized than half the attorneys I know," Grace said. Mrs. Nadine, who had arrived with cinnamon rolls and no invitation, said, "Eleanor organized grudges alphabetically." Grace found the river easement first. Then she found the problem in Blue Ridge Horizons plan. Their proposed access road depended on the county pretending my property line ended 30 feet before it actually did. Their environmental filing listed the slope behind my house as unused woodland, not residential land with protected water access. Their resort map left off 2 old family cemeteries and a spring that fed 3 properties downstream. "This is not just pressure," Grace said. "This is fraud dressed as planning." Daniel stood at the window, arms folded, jaw tight. "They did this before," he said. "Then we make them explain it twice." The first county meeting was held in a low brick building that smelled of coffee, dust, and wet coats. I wore the navy dress I used to wear to hospital review boards because it made me feel steady. Mark appeared unexpectedly, sitting in the back row with Vance. Seeing them together should have shocked me. It did not. It only confirmed what I had already felt. When my name was called, I stood with my folder in both hands. My knees shook so badly I thought everyone could see. Daniel sat behind me, but he did not touch me, did not whisper, did not try to become the center of my courage. That helped. I spoke about the house, about the will, about the fire, about the forged signature, about Grandma's records. Grace submitted the documents. Daniel gave his statement. 2 other landowners stood after him, then a third. Vance kept smiling until the mechanic played the voicemail. The room changed after that. People who had come only to watch began looking at one another. County officials who had been leaning back in their chairs sat forward. Mark left before the meeting ended. Outside, under the yellow parking lot lights, I found him waiting beside my car. "You are making a mistake," he said. "No, I'm correcting one. That man will ruin you." I looked back through the glass doors at Daniel, who was helping Mrs. Nadine down the steps while she scolded him for treating her like glass. "No," I said. "He is teaching me what help looks like when it doesn't come with a bill." Mark's face hardened. "You think this town loves you? They love what you can do for them. They love your money." For a moment, the old fear moved in me. Then Mrs. Nadine shouted from across the lot, "Claire, if that man is bothering you, I still have my late husband's tire iron." Mark turned red. I laughed. Not politely, not nervously. I laughed because he looked suddenly small, standing there with all his threats and no room left to perform them. He left without another word. Sam called me after that. "Claire," he said carefully, "is any of this true?" "No." "Then tell me what is true." So I did. For the first time in years, I told my brother the truth about my marriage. Not all of it at once. Enough. There was a long silence on the line. Then Sam said, "I should have noticed." I hid it. I still should have noticed. Rachel, who had never been my favorite person, surprised me by sending a divorce attorney's number and a message that said, "He sounds like my first husband. Do not negotiate with hunger." I kept that message. Blue Ridge Horizon began to crack when 3 other landowners came forward with similar stories. One elderly couple had been told their deed had a defect. A widow had been offered half the value of her property after an inspector threatened condemnation. A mechanic produced a voicemail from Vance's assistant that should never have been left. Daniel's documents tied the pieces together. Grandma's old files completed the picture. She had known more than anyone imagined. In a drawer beneath the stairs, we found a final folder labeled, "If They Come Back." Inside were copies of letters, old maps, tax records, and a handwritten note in her sharp blue ink. Men who call greed progress will always return wearing a nicer suit. I read that line aloud in the kitchen while Daniel leaned against the counter and Mrs. Nadine stood at the stove making pancakes as if we were not discussing corporate fraud before breakfast. That woman, Mrs. Nadine said, was a blessing and a menace. By autumn, the resort project was suspended. By winter, Vance was under investigation. By spring, Mark signed the divorce papers. He did not apologize. I had stopped expecting apologies from people who experienced accountability as a personal insult. The day the divorce became final, I walked down to the river alone. The water was high from spring melt, rushing over stones, bright under the sun. I carried my grandmother's first letter in my coat pocket. The paper had grown soft at the folds. Daniel found me there, but he stayed a little distance away. "You okay?" I looked at the water. "I think so." That's a cautious answer. I'm a cautious woman. Fair. He stood beside me, leaving a respectful space between our shoulders. For months he had done that, stayed close enough to be there, far enough not to trap me. It was a kind of gentleness I did not know how to accept at first. "I don't know how to start over," I said. "Most people don't. They just start doing one honest thing at a time." "Is that what you did?" He smiled faintly. "No, I avoided everyone and fixed fences for 8 years. I laughed. The sound startled a bird from the reeds. Daniel looked at me then, and something passed between us that had been waiting, patient and quiet, for the right moment. He did not kiss me. Not yet. He only said, "Eleanor would be glad you're here." Would she be glad you're here? The question changed his face. He looked toward the river. I hope so. She wrote that the house would set it right. Did it? I thought of Portland, Mark's hand on my wrist, the suitcase, the first night in the house, the flashlight in the trees, Mrs. Nadine's biscuits, Daniel's silence, the forged signature, the notary office, the divorce papers, the river. "It's working," I said. That summer, I did not go back to Portland. I meant to, at first. I told myself I would stay only until the legal issues were settled, only until the house was safe, only until I decided what to do with the money. But the house changed my sense of time. I planted herbs by the kitchen steps. I painted the shutters white. I learned which floorboard creaked no matter where you stepped. I took a part-time nursing job at the urgent care clinic 40 minutes away, then began talking with the county about a small rural health office in Millstone Creek. At first the idea sounded impossible. Then it sounded difficult. Then it sounded like a plan. Daniel drew the first sketch on the back of an old envelope at my kitchen table. "A side entrance here," he said. "Waiting area facing the road. Exam room here. Storage along this wall. Ramp from the driveway." You make it sound easy. It isn't. Then why are you smiling? Because hard is better than impossible. I looked at the drawing. In the corner, below the rough lines of walls and doors, he had written 7 words. "The house still has room for healing." I pressed my fingers to the paper. "Daniel." He looked up. There are moments when a life changes without a door slamming, without a phone ringing, without anyone announcing that everything will be different from now on. Sometimes it is just a man at a kitchen table, pencil in hand, offering you a future that does not require you to disappear. I kissed him first. He froze for half a second, startled, as if happiness were something that might vanish if touched too quickly. Then he kissed me back. Not like Mark, who had always kissed as if taking something. Daniel kissed as if asking, and I answered by staying. Mrs. Nadine saw us the next morning on the porch. She had brought pancakes in a covered dish because apparently romance made no difference to her breakfast schedule. She looked at Daniel, then at me, then at Daniel again. Her mouth pressed tight, fighting a smile. "Finally," she said. Then she walked into the kitchen as if she had personally arranged the weather, the inheritance, the fire, the divorce, and the entire Blue Ridge investigation for this exact result. Maybe she had. 2 years passed. The restriction in Grandma's will expired on a rainy Tuesday in May. Mr. Henderson called from Portland and asked if I wanted to discuss options for the property and funds now that I was free to sell, transfer, or restructure them. I was standing in the new clinic addition, watching Daniel adjust the last cabinet door while a delivery truck backed into the driveway with medical supplies. "No," I said. "No discussion, no sale." I heard him smile through the phone. I suspected as much. The clinic opened 3 weeks later. We called it Riverbend Health Room because it was too small and too stubborn to be called anything grand. The sign was carved by Daniel and painted by me. Mrs. Nadine brought cookies and told every visitor they were too thin, too pale, or too proud to admit they needed their blood pressure checked. People came. An old farmer with a cut hand, a young mother with a feverish child, a man who had not seen a nurse in 5 years because he did not want to drive into Asheville, teenagers needing sports physicals, women needing someone to listen before something small became something dangerous. The house, which had spent years waiting, filled with voices again, not loud voices, not perfect ones, real ones. One evening in late October, Daniel and I sat on the porch while the river moved below us and the apple trees dropped leaves into the grass. "Do you ever wonder," I asked, "what would have happened if Grandma hadn't written that condition into the will?" "You would have sold the house." "Probably." "Mark would have taken half your piece and called it practical." I looked at him. "That's very poetic for a man who claims to only fix fences." "Fences teach a person things." I leaned my head against his shoulder. "Do you regret anything?" He was quiet. The question had lived between us from the beginning. Tell him not to regret anything. At last he said, "I regret not saving Catherine. I regret years I spent punishing myself when she would have hated that. I regret not telling you the whole truth the first day." I waited. He took my hand. "But I don't regret staying near this house. I don't regret fixing the fence. I don't regret loving you." The river kept moving in the dark. I thought of Grandma in the hospital, her thin fingers around my wrist, her eyes full of something I had mistaken for confusion. She had known exactly what she was doing. The house by the river still stands. The shutters are white now, freshly painted before each winter. The apple trees are trimmed. The pantry is full of jars I learned to seal with Mrs. Nadine, scolding me from a chair. The clinic has a separate entrance and a wooden sign. In a town that went almost 20 years without steady medical care, people now have a place to come when they are hurt, frightened, feverish, or simply tired of being strong alone. And in the old farmhouse that 4 generations built, lost, guarded, and finally passed on, 2 people live quietly. Not perfectly, quietly. Some mornings I still wake before dawn, expecting the old fear, expecting Mark's voice, expecting the phone to light up with another message telling me I am foolish, fragile, incapable. But then I hear the river. I hear Daniel moving carefully in the kitchen because he still believes he can make coffee without waking me, though the floorboards betray him every time. I smell cedar, rain, and bread. And I remember, the house did set it right. Not all at once, not magically, not the way people imagine healing happens in stories. It set things right slowly. It gave me distance from a life I had mistaken for duty. It gave me neighbors who knocked without asking and stayed without smothering. It gave me documents hidden in drawers, letters behind bricks, and the truth waiting patiently under dust. It gave me a man who did not demand trust, but earned it piece by piece. It gave me work that mattered. It gave me mornings that belonged to me. Most of all, it gave me back my own voice. For a long time, I thought love was something you survived. Now I know love is the place where your breathing finally becomes your own. Sometimes I think about all the things that had to go wrong for me to arrive here. If Grandma had not died when she did, if the will had not included that strange condition, if Mark had pretended kindness for just one more night, if I had not packed the suitcase, if Daniel had not fixed the fence, if the fire had not forced the truth into daylight, if. But life is not built from the clean paths we planned. It is built from the broken roads we were brave enough to keep walking. Every loss led me here. Every fear brought me to this porch. Every dark turn on that road became necessary, because without it, I would not have this river outside my window, this work under my hands, this man beside me, this peace I once thought belonged only to other people. Grandma wrote, "The house by the river will set it right." I thought she meant it as a comfort. I know now she meant it as a promise, and she was right.